Restart Episode 2. The day had begun in laughter. The sun hung lazily over the fields beyond the village walls, and the air shimmered with the warmth of midsummer. This small village held about 200 settlers, as the farthest citizens of the radiant empire of Valoria. Percival and his friends had gathered near the grove, tossing a wooden ball back and forth, their carefree shouts mingling with the hum of bees and the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer. The world had felt safe, untouchable. The guards at the gate watched with amused smiles, leaning on their spears, and even the old hound that followed the children around had dozed in the grass. Then came the sound. At first it was faint, just a rustle, like the whisper of wind stirring dry leaves. Percival turned toward the grove, squinting into the shadows. The laughter faltered. The rustling grew louder, heavier, as though something large was pushing through the underbrush. A crow screamed overhead, and then the forest erupted. Goblins poured out from between the trees, small, twisted figures with mottled green skin and eyes that gleamed like sickly lanterns. Their shrieks split the air, a chorus of madness and hunger. They carried crude weapons, jagged blades, rusted axes, and spears tipped with bone. The first villager to fall was a farmer, struck down before he could even shout a warning. Then chaos descended. Percival's heart pounded as he stumbled backward, clutching the ball like a talisman. His friend Elric stood beside him, frozen in disbelief. "Run!" Percival shouted, but his voice cracked, swallowed by the noise. The goblins were everywhere now, darting between the villagers, slashing, stabbing, laughing. A spear whistled through the air. Percival ducked instinctively, but Elric wasn't fast enough. The weapon struck him square in the chest with a wet, terrible sound. He gasped, eyes wide, and fell backward into the grass, the wooden shaft jutting from his ribs. For a heartbeat, the world went silent. "No, no, no, no!" Percival dropped to his knees beside him. His hands trembled as he reached for the spear, unsure what to do. Blood welled around Elric's mouth as he tried to speak, his fingers clutching weakly at Percival's sleeve. "Hold on," Percival whispered, his voice breaking. "I'll get help. Just hold on." But before he could move, a shadow fell over them. A goblin lunged forward, its teeth bared in a grin that made Percival's stomach twist. Two more followed, snarling, their eyes fixed on Elric. Percival grabbed a rock and hurled it, striking one in the forehead. It staggered back with a hiss, but the others didn't stop. They seized Elric by the arms and legs, dragging him across the ground. "Let him go!" Percival screamed, lunging after them. He managed to grab Elric's hand for an instant, but then a clawed foot kicked him hard in the chest, sending him sprawling. The goblins vanished into the grove, their shrill laughter echoing through the trees, Elric's limp body carried between them. Percival lay there for a moment, gasping, the world spinning. The smell of blood and smoke filled his nose. Around him, the meadow was a nightmare. Villagers fleeing, goblins swarming, the air thick with screams. He wanted to chase after them, to save his friend. But another spear struck the ground inches from his face. Instinct took over. He scrambled to his feet and ran toward the village wall, tears blurring his vision. Behind him, the goblins howled, their voices rising in cruel triumph. He didn't look back. He couldn't. By the time he reached the gate, his lungs were on fire. He pounded on the wood with both fists, shouting for them to open, but the village door was shut. The guards inside shouted in panic and couldn't hear the screams or the little pounding of his tiny fists against the wood. Percival turned one last time toward the grove. The trees loomed dark and silent now, but he could still hear faint laughter drifting from within, high, mocking, and inhuman. His friend was gone, swallowed by the shadows, and for the first time in his life, Percival understood what true fear was. The meadow was chaos still. Percival pressed himself against the village wall, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with terror. The goblins swarmed like insects, their shrieks rising in a hideous chorus as they closed in on the last of the fleeing villagers. The air was thick with the sound of metal clashing, of screams and snarls, only the raw, brutal noise of slaughter. A row of small goblins began walking toward the village, mocking poor Percival as he cowered at the gate door. "Looks like we got a straggler. Too little to be let in," one said as they all laughed. Then, something peculiar happened. The sky trembled. A shadow swept over the battlefield, vast and majestic. Percival looked up, his breath catching in his throat. A dragon soared above the village, its scales glinting like polished gold in the sunlight. Upon its back stood a man, tall, straight, and radiant in armor that gleamed as though forged from sunlight itself. His cloak whipped behind him, and in his hand he held a spear wreathed in golden flame that did not burn the air but shimmered like a living star. "Pyraxis!" The man's voice thundered across the field, commanding and sure. "Let your fire burn us a path!" The dragon reared back, its chest expanding, and with a roar that shook the heavens, it unleashed a torrent of flame. The fire rolled across the ground in a sweeping arc, forming a blazing barrier between the goblins and the villagers. The heat struck Percival's face, forcing him to shield his eyes. The goblins screamed and stumbled back, their advance halted by the wall of living fire that now divided the field. Above them, the dragon wheeled in the sky, its rider directing it with precision. "Pyraxis, left flank! Cut them off!" he commanded. The dragon obeyed instantly, sweeping low and releasing another stream of fire that split the goblin ranks in two. The horde faltered, their courage breaking. The man on the dragon pointed his spear toward the horde. "Hold the barrier, Pyraxis. None shall pass." Then, with a motion like lightning, 4 figures leapt from the dragon's back, landing amidst the goblins with the force of falling stars. Each was clad in golden armor, their very presence radiating power and light. When they impacted the ground, they sent a mass of goblins flying in all directions. The first, a massive warrior wielding a great sword, with a great shield on his back, swung his blade in a wide arc that cleaved through 3 goblins at once. Each strike left trails of light that lingered in the air before fading. His movements were deliberate and unstoppable, like the turning of the earth itself. The second, a swift fighter armed with twin daggers that gleamed like molten gold, darted between enemies with impossible speed. He moved like a dancer, each motion precise and silent. Goblins fell before they even saw him, their bodies collapsing into the dirt as he vanished and reappeared among them. The third was a woman, her golden braids catching the firelight as she charged forward with twin axes. She fought with a fierce joy, her laughter ringing out above the din of battle. Each swing of her weapons shattered shields and split armor, the goblins scattering before her like leaves in a storm. The fourth stood slightly apart, holding a staff crowned with a glowing crystal. He raised it high, and a wave of golden light rippled outward, searing through the goblin ranks. Those caught in its path dropped their weapons, blinded and screaming, as the others pressed the attack. Above them, the dragon wheeled, its wings stirring the smoke from its own fire into swirling patterns. The man upon its back, his voice calm even amid the chaos, gave orders with precision. "Pyraxis, sweep the left flank! Drive them toward the ridge!" The dragon obeyed, diving low and releasing another controlled burst of flame that cut off the goblin's retreat. Then, with a single leap, the man dismounted. He landed in the heart of the battle directly onto a goblin bodyguard who was looking up at him, the warrior's golden spear blazing brighter than ever as it pierced the goblin in a powerful attack. The goblin chief, a towering brute clad in bone and hide, roared and charged. The man sidestepped, spun, and drove his spear through the creature's chest. The impact sent a shockwave through the ground, and the chief crumpled, lifeless, smoke rising from the wound. The battle quieted down for a few moments as the dragon soared above, billowing fire and wind as the goblins began to run in all directions. The man with the spear turned and strode toward the village wall. In his arms, he carried a small figure, Elric. Percival's heart stopped. The boy's face was pale, his chest unmoving. The man knelt, laying him gently upon the grass. "Stay back, just a little," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of command and compassion. He placed one hand over Elric's wound and began to chant. The words were ancient, flowing like music. Golden light spread from his palm, seeping into the boy's body, glowing brighter with each syllable. The wound mended before Percival's eyes, the blood vanishing, the skin knitting together as though time itself had reversed. Elric's chest rose. He blinked, then looked up at the man with wide, innocent eyes. "Well, hello, sir," he said weakly, his voice small but full of wonder. The dagger-wielding warrior chuckled, wiping his blades clean. "That's not a sir, kid," he said with a grin. "That's the emperor in training." "Yeah, like a tiny baby emperor," said another. Finally, the sorcerer commented, "Like a princeling. He's just a little guy." Laughter rippled through the golden warriors, even the dragon rumbling with amusement as he flew high above in a defensive circle around the group. Percival stood frozen, tears streaking his face as the man this High Prince of Valoria smiled down at Elric. "Who knew that imperial knights were so funny?" said the man who healed Elric's wound. A female knight walked closer to the group, said, "I was going to say fun-sized, but was just not fast enough." More laughs were heard as they stood closer and all looked at the golden man in the middle while commenting, "Fun-sized emperor." As the golden warriors stood in a loose circle, their armor gleaming beneath the fading light, Elric stirred, blinking up at the man who held him safe. The stranger's face was calm, noble, and radiant, his eyes the color of molten gold and the deepest blue. "I am High Prince Alarion, heir to the Valorian throne," he said, his voice deep and steady, carrying the authority of command and the warmth of compassion. "It is my sacred duty to protect all loyal servants of Valoria, no matter their station or strength. Every soul who lives under her banner is my charge. Even these imperial knights who stopped fighting just to jest at me." His words seemed to hum with power, the air itself responding to his presence. Elric swallowed hard, his voice small and uncertain. "Even me?" Alarion's expression softened, and a faint smile touched his lips. "Especially you, young one," he said gently. "For courage is not born from power. It is born from heart, and yours burns bright." The boy's eyes widened, a flush of pride rising in his cheeks. Percival, standing just behind them, could only stare in disbelief. The Emperor's son, the High Prince himself, was kneeling before them, speaking as though they were equals. Awe and amazement rooted Percival to the spot. His breath came shallow, his mind struggling to grasp the enormity of the moment. Prince Alarion rose to his full height, his golden spear catching the light as he turned to the warriors who stood behind him. "These," he said, his voice ringing clear across the field, "are the Imperial Knights of the Dawn Guard, the chosen protectors of Valoria's light." He gestured to each in turn. Sir Cale Ironward, the steadfast, whose shield and longsword has never fallen, and whose courage never breaks. Cale bowed his head, silent and immovable as stone. Serene Vale, the Whisper Blade, swift as shadow, unseen until the strike has already landed. Seren twirled one dagger with a roguish grin. Captain Lysandra Stormheart, commander of the Dawn Guard. Her fury is the storm that breaks our enemies, her loyalty the fire that binds us. Lysandra gave a proud nod, her twin axes glinting in the light. And Archmage Thalin Duray, master of the celestial flame, whose wisdom guides our path and whose fire burns away the dark. Thalin inclined his head, the runes on his staff glowing faintly in acknowledgement. Then Alarion turned, his gaze lifting toward the massive golden form that loomed just beyond the group. The dragon's scales shimmered like polished metal, each one reflecting the firelight in dazzling brilliance. "And this," Alarion said, his tone softening with something that almost sounded like affection, "is Pyraxis the eternal flame, my greatest ally and my oldest friend. He has fought beside me through 100 battles and saved my life more times than I can count." He paused, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "He also happens to have the worst temper in the entire empire." Pyraxis snorted, a puff of smoke curling from his nostrils before a deep, rumbling laugh rolled from his chest. "Careful, boy," the dragon rumbled, his voice like thunder softened by amusement. "Keep talking like that, and I'll start charging you for my rescues." The warriors laughed together and turned to look back onto the battlefield. The golden light of their armor mingled with the dragon's glow, casting long, warm shadows across the field. Percival could only watch, heart pounding, as he realized he was standing among legends, heroes whose deeds would fill the songs of generations. And at their center stood High Prince Alarion, spear in hand, his presence radiant and commanding, the living embodiment of Valoria's might and mercy. "Guards," said Prince Alarion in a loud, powerful voice, "open your doors and let these children in." The laughter had barely faded when the fire flickered. Percival's smile froze. The golden barrier that had held the goblins at bay wavered, the flames bending inward as dark shapes moved within them. A low hiss rose from the far side of the blaze, followed by a guttural roar. From the wall of fire, 5 goblins burst forth, charred, furious, their skin blistered and blackened, but their eyes still burning with hate. They shrieked as they charged, weapons raised, their twisted silhouettes leaping through the heat and smoke. Before Percival could even cry out, the prince moved. He stepped forward, drawing the golden spear from where he had planted it from the ground. The spear caught the light of the fire and blazed like the sun itself. The first goblin lunged, and in a single fluid strike, the man cleaved it cleanly in 2. He pivoted, the spear flashing again, cutting through the next 2 before they could even swing their crude axes. The air hissed with the speed of his movements, and when he stopped, 3 bodies fell in perfect silence, split from shoulder to hip. The remaining two goblins skidded to a halt, their courage faltering, but the sorcerer was already raising his staff. "You should have stayed in the shadows," he said, his voice calm and cold. He thrust the staff forward, and twin jets of golden fire erupted from its tip, engulfing the creatures. Their screams were brief, swallowed by the light as they crumbled into ash. Then, with a sharp motion, the sorcerer drove the base of his staff into the ground. The earth shuddered. A pulse of shimmering energy rippled outward in a perfect circle, sweeping across the battlefield. The shockwave struck with the sound of thunder. Every goblin still standing froze mid-motion, their weapons dropping from nerveless fingers. The air itself seemed to hum with power. From above, a deep roar answered. The dragon, Pyraxis, descended in a rush of wind, its wings stirring the flames into spiraling columns. It landed heavily beside the Emperor's son, the ground trembling beneath its talons. Its golden eyes narrowed as it spotted a cluster of stunned goblins scrambling to flee. With a single, almost lazy motion, Pyraxis lunged forward and scooped up 4 of them in its massive jaws. There was a crunch, a wet, unpleasant sound, and then the dragon lifted its head, grimacing. It spat the mangled remains onto the scorched earth, smoke curling from its nostrils. "Ugh!" the dragon rumbled, its voice deep and resonant. "Goblin guts. Disgusting. They taste like burnt moss and cowardice." The golden warriors laughed. Even the Emperor's son allowed a small smile as he slammed the golden spear back into the ground. The sorcerer leaned on his staff, the glow fading from its runes, and the fire barrier began to die down, leaving only the faint scent of ash and victory in the air. Percival stood frozen, still clutching Elric's hand, his heart pounding. Around him, the heroes seemed almost otherworldly, their armor gleaming, their faces calm despite the carnage. The dragon lowered its head, exhaling a long plume of smoke that shimmered gold in the fading light. The Emperor's son turned to the villagers, his voice steady and clear. "We are the Dawn Guard," he said. "You are safe now." And for the first time since the attack began, Percival believed him. Pyraxis lifted his head, nostrils flaring, his golden eyes narrowing toward the ridge where the next wave of goblins gathered. A low rumble built in his chest, deep and resonant, vibrating through the scorched ground beneath him. "There are more," the dragon growled, his voice rolling like distant thunder. 1,000, maybe more, crawling through the dark, and 2 chieftains among them. His teeth gleamed like blades as he bared them. "They're coming for another charge." The Dawn Guard turned as one, their golden armor gleaming in the firelight. Captain Lysandra Stormheart rested one axe on her shoulder, her braid catching the glow as she looked toward High Prince Alarion. "If we hadn't left when you ordered it," she said, her tone fierce but respectful, "this village would have been nothing but ash and bones. That was masterful command, my lord." Alarion's gaze stayed fixed on the ridge, where the goblin horde seethed like a living shadow. "Thank you, but this isn't over yet," he said quietly. "This fun-sized hero still has work to do." He stepped forward, planting the butt of his golden spear deeper into the ground. A deep hum resonated through the earth, and cracks of molten light spread outward in a spiderweb of radiance. "Hold on 1 second." He closed his eyes. The air thickened, vibrating with unseen power. The light that began in Alarion's chest pulsed outward in waves, each one stronger than the last. The ground trembled beneath him as his chest armor, neck, and arms began to liquefy, the metal flowing like molten gold across his skin. His breath came slow and steady, every exhale releasing sparks of light that drifted upward like embers. Then came the sound, a deep, resonant crack that split the air. The glow intensified, spreading up his neck, down his arms, until his entire body was engulfed in a storm of radiance. The energy rippled outward, bending the air, warping the light. The smell of ozone filled the valley. His bones shifted with a grinding sound, his muscles expanding, his frame stretching skyward. His roar built from deep within, rising through his chest until it burst forth as a deafening shockwave that sent dust and ash spiraling. The light exploded outward, blinding all who looked directly upon him. When the brilliance faded, a titanic golden lion stood in his place, 10 feet tall, upright and regal, his mane a corona of living fire. His eyes burned like twin suns, and each breath he drew shimmered with heat. The ground blackened beneath his feet, molten cracks spreading outward with every step. The air around him distorted, shimmering as if the world itself struggled to contain his power. He reached down and seized his golden spear. The weapon thrummed with divine energy, its shaft alive with molten veins of light, its blade a crescent of pure radiance. As he lifted it, arcs of gold lightning danced along its edge, and the ground beneath him turned to glass. This was exactly why Prince Alarion received the nickname from those on the field as the Roaring Dawn. His transformation always boosted his troops and empowered everyone to do better and be better. Then he moved, and his knights followed. The first step was a thunderclap. The second was a blur. By the third, he was gone. Nothing but a streak of golden light tearing across the battlefield. The shockwave of his passage flattened the grass and sent goblins tumbling like leaves in a storm. He struck the first wave with the force of a falling star. His spear cut through the front ranks, cleaving bodies in perfect halves, the sheer velocity of his movement vaporizing blood before it could even hit the ground. Goblins screamed, their armor shattering like glass under the onslaught. But these were not the weak, sniveling creatures of legend. These goblins were hardened warkin, their skin like leathered iron, their weapons forged from scavenged steel and bone. They fought in disciplined ranks, snarling and roaring, their chieftains' whips cracking from behind. They surged forward, blades flashing, arrows hissing through the air. Prince Alarion met them head-on. His spear became a blur of motion, each swing a streak of molten gold. He spun, thrust, and struck with inhuman precision, each blow cutting through multiple foes at once. Hundreds fell in moments, their bodies collapsing into heaps of ash and molten slag. To his left, Lysandra roared, her axes spinning in a deadly rhythm, each strike cleaving through armor and bone. Cale Ironward stood unyielding, his great sword carving massive arcs of destruction, his shield deflecting the rain of arrows. Seren Vale darted among the chaos, a flicker of shadow and light, his twin daggers finding throats and hearts with surgical precision. Archmage Thalan Duray raised his staff, summoning pillars of golden flame that erupted from the sky, consuming entire clusters of goblins in roaring infernos. Above them, Pyraxis soared, his wings blotting out the sun, forcing shadows onto the ground. He inhaled deeply, his chest glowing from within, then unleashed a torrent of fire that swept across the battlefield. The flames rolled outward like a tidal wave, engulfing hundreds of goblins and cutting off their retreat. The dragon's fire formed a blazing ring, trapping the horde within a circle of annihilation. The goblins fought with savage desperation. They hurled spears, slashed with jagged blades, and leapt upon the golden warriors in frenzied packs. Yet for every one that struck, 10 more fell. Alarion's spear split through them like a divine scythe, his movements a blur of light and death. He tore through their ranks, his claws rending flesh, his roars shaking the heavens. Still, the chieftains rallied their kin. The first, a hulking brute clad in spiked armor, bellowed commands in a guttural tongue. His weapon, a massive cleaver of black iron, glowed faintly red, pulsing with dark enchantment. He charged, his roar echoing across the valley. Alarion turned, his golden eyes narrowing. The two titans met in a clash that shook the earth. The chieftain swung, the cleaver carving a crescent of darkness through the air. But Alarion caught the blow on his spear, the impact sending a shockwave that flattened the nearby goblins. Sparks of gold and crimson flew as the two forces collided, divine light against corrupted shadow. The goblin chieftain pressed forward, his strength immense, his blows relentless. Alarion's claws tore through the brute's armor, but the creature fought on, roaring in defiance. The battle raged for long minutes, each strike echoing like thunder. Finally, Alarion fainted, then drove his spear straight through the chieftain's chest. The weapon burst from the creature's back in a flare of golden light, and with a final roar, the goblin leader exploded into ash and flame. The second chieftain, smaller but far more cunning, watched from the ridge. His eyes glowed with sickly green light, his staff crowned with a skull that pulsed with necrotic energy. He raised it high, chanting in a guttural tongue. The ground trembled, and from the corpses of the fallen rose twisted shadows, reanimated goblins, their flesh blackened, their eyes burning with unholy fire. Prince Alarion snarled, his mane flaring brighter. "You dare!" he thundered. The necromancer shrieked and unleashed a wave of dark energy. The blast struck Alarion square in the chest, but the golden lion only staggered, his aura flaring brighter in response. He leapt forward, his spear spinning in a spiral of light that cut through the undead ranks like paper. The necromancer tried to flee, but Pyraxis swooped low, his claws tearing through the ridge. The dragon's roar drowned out the goblin's screams as Alarion closed the distance in a single bound. He drove his spear through the necromancer's chest, pinning him to the earth. The goblin spat curses, his body convulsing as black smoke poured from his wounds. Alarion leaned close, his voice low and terrible. "Return to the darkness that spawned you." He twisted the spear. The goblin's body erupted in a burst of golden fire, the dark magic unraveling into nothingness. When the flames died, silence fell. The valley was a sea of ash and molten earth, the air shimmering with heat. The Dawn Guard stood victorious as countless goblins ran around broken and leaderless. Pyraxis landed behind them, folding his wings with a deep, satisfied expression, ready to end the remaining herd. Suddenly, a rumble came from the horizon and turned into a deep, rolling thunder that grew louder and louder with every heartbeat. Through the haze of smoke and drifting ash, the golden conclave emerged over the ridge like a sunrise given form. Hundreds of mounted knights rode in gleaming formation, their armor polished to mirror brightness, their banners trailing ribbons of light. Each warrior bore a sword of radiant steel, and their steeds, massive war horses clad in gilded plate, snorted plumes of golden mist as they thundered forward. The sunlight caught upon their ranks, and for a moment, the entire horizon burned with brilliance. They struck the battlefield like a divine tide. The first wave of goblins barely had time to turn before they were engulfed. The knight's charge crashed into them with unstoppable force, hooves pounding, blades flashing, golden cloaks whipping through the smoke. Goblins were cleaved apart by the dozens, their armor shattering under the sheer weight of the assault. The air filled with the sound of steel and screams, the rhythm of war drums replaced by the thunder of hooves. The knights moved as one, a living wall of light and fury, cutting down the remnants of the horde with surgical precision. At the edge of the battlefield stood two young kids, Percival and his closest friend, Elric, both too inexperienced to join the main assault, yet too loyal to turn away. They watched in stunned silence as the golden riders swept through the valley, their swords carving arcs of pure light through the darkness. Percival's mouth hung open, his heart hammering in his chest. He had never seen knights train, never seen them ride, but never, never had he witnessed such divine power made flesh. His gaze drifted to the center of the field, where High Prince Alarion, still half-wreathed in fading radiance, stood like a god among men. The sight filled him with awe and something deeper, reverence perhaps, or the first spark of faith. Beside him, Elric swallowed hard, his eyes wide as he whispered, "By the saints above. I'll not forget this day if I live to be 100 winters. No bard's tale could ever tell it true." His voice trembled with wonder, the words of a boy who had just seen the impossible made real. Percival could only nod, his throat too tight for speech, his young mind struggling to grasp that he had just witnessed what legends were made of. As the last goblin fell, the golden conclave slowed their charge, reforming into perfect ranks. The battlefield fell silent save for the crackle of embers and the soft clink of bridles. The knights turned toward Prince Alarion, who now stood amid the ruin, his leonine form fading as the divine light withdrew. His mane dimmed, his claws receded, and the molten glow of his eyes softened to human gold and deep blue. When the transformation ended, he stood once more as a man, tall, noble, and weary. He lowered his spear, exhaling slowly, the weight of godhood slipping from his shoulders. Yet as he rested the weapon against the scorched earth, his left hand trembled, faint but unmistakable. From above, Pyraxis watched, his massive wings folding as he settled upon a ridge. The dragon's golden eyes narrowed, his gaze fixed on that trembling hand. A low, rumbling growl built in his chest, not of anger, but of concern. He said nothing, for he knew the truth of such power. Even the brightest flame leaves its bearer scarred. The battle was won, the valley reclaimed, but as the knights saluted and the squires stared in breathless awe, the dragon's ancient heart stirred with unease. For in that single, trembling hand, he saw the cost of greatness. The battlefield still shimmered with heat and smoke when the last echo of hooves faded into silence. The golden conclave stood poised amid the smoldering ruin, their armor gleaming like the sun reborn. The acrid scent of smoke and blood hung heavy in the air, mingling with the faint hum of lingering magic. High Prince Alarion stood at the center of it all, the golden spear planted firmly in the cracked earth, his eyes surveying the devastation. The light of his transformation had faded, leaving him once more a man, strong, regal, but visibly drained. His left hand trembled faintly as he tightened his grip on the weapon, though he masked the motion with a slow, deliberate breath. "Captain Lysandra," he called, his voice carrying across the scorched valley. The captain walked forward, her armor scorched but unbowed, the twin axes at her sides still faintly glowing from battle. She saluted by bringing her axe to her chest and bowing low before her prince. "Gather your riders," Alarion commanded, his tone calm but edged with authority. "Scour the field. Every goblin corpse is to be burned. No trace of their corruption is to remain. Their blood poisons the soil if left to rot." He turned his gaze toward the scattered remnants of the fallen horde, where strange glimmers of light flickered among the ashes. "And any magical relics or artifacts they carried, bring them to me. Their kind steals what they do not understand. I will not have their foul magic left to fester." Lysandra struck her fist to her chest in salute. "By your will, my prince." She turned to her lieutenants, her voice rising like a battle cry. "You heard him. Form retrieval lines. Burn every corpse. Strip the field of anything that glows, hums, or reeks of sorcery. Leave nothing for the crows." "How close are the healers and mages?" Captain Lysandra asked. One knight responded quickly. "They are with the carriages and squires. They should be here in 1 hour." She nodded in acceptance as she said, "Let's get to it then." The knights moved at once, their discipline as sharp in aftermath as in war. They dismounted and spread across the valley, torches flaring to life as they began their grim work. The corpses of goblins were dragged into heaps, their twisted forms piled high before being set ablaze. The flames roared, consuming the bodies in waves of orange and gold, the smoke rising like dark banners into the night sky. Others sifted through the ash and wreckage, retrieving shards of enchanted steel, cracked amulets, and fragments of goblin core crystals. Each item was sealed in runic cloth and placed in golden chests carried by the squires. Percival and Elric, still standing near the gate, watched in silence as the knights worked. The sight was both terrible and mesmerizing, the discipline of holy warriors cleansing the battlefield of evil. Percival's heart swelled with pride and unease all at once. He turned to Elric, who stared wide-eyed at the burning heaps. "They make war look like art," Percival murmured. Elric nodded slowly, his voice hushed. "Aye," he said, his tone reverent. "And I reckon the devils below will whisper this night's tale for centuries." The fires still burned low across the valley, their glow flickering against the polished armor of the golden conclave as the knights continued their grim work. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and charred flesh, the silence broken only by the crackle of flames and the distant hiss of cooling steel. Captain Lysandra Stormheart stood at the center of the field, overseeing the collection of relics and the burning of the goblin dead. Her expression was hard, her eyes sharp, every motion precise and controlled. From the western flank, a rider approached, his armor gilded and marked with the sigil of the Third Lance. He slowed his steed a few paces from the captain, then dismounted in one fluid motion. The knight brought his fist to his chest and bowed his head in salute. "Captain Stormheart," he said, his voice steady but edged with unease. "A word, if I may." Lysandra turned to face him, her gaze cool and commanding. "Speak, Sir Darren. What have you found?" The knight removed his helm, revealing a face streaked with soot and sweat. "My captain, the men are unsettled. The goblins, these creatures, they've not been seen in this valley for millennia. The chronicles of Valoria speak of peace here since the Age of Dawning. This land was sanctified by the old kings themselves. For them to appear now—" He paused, glancing toward the smoldering heaps of corpses. "It defies every record we hold." Lysandra's jaw tightened. "I know," she said quietly. and that troubles me more than you can imagine. Goblins do not march this far north without cause. Something or someone drove them here." Sir Darren nodded grimly, then straightened, his gaze shifting toward the far edge of the battlefield as a knight approached with great speed and then with great care slowed his armored horse as mud and ash flung into the air. He pulled next to Sir Darren and spoke with urgency. Sir Darren's eyes shot to another spot further in the distance, and he spoke. "We've pacified the last of them, Captain," he continued, "but there's something else. Someone approaches from the southern ridge. Not one of ours." He pointed with his gauntleted hand. Tall figure cloaked in black. Doesn't move like a goblin. Doesn't move like any man we've seen. Before Lysandra could respond, a deep, resonant voice boomed across the valley. Pyraxis, perched high upon a ridge, his wings half spread in sudden alarm. "Hold!" the dragon thundered, his roar shaking the scorched earth. "All of you, wait!" Every knight froze in place. The air grew heavy, the flames guttering as if the world itself held its breath. From the haze of smoke and ash, a shadow began to take form. Tall, slender, and cloaked in darkness so deep it seemed to drink the light around it. The figure walked with unhurried grace, each step deliberate, the hem of its cloak whispering across the scorched ground. As it drew closer, the knights could see the faint outline of elongated ears, unmistakably elven, but the face beneath the hood was too human, too smooth, its features caught between two worlds. The being stopped a few paces from the nearest line of riders, then slowly raised its hands and clapped, the sound sharp and mocking in the still air. "Well done," the stranger said, his voice smooth and unsettlingly calm. "Truly magnificent. The light of Valoria shines bright indeed." Lysandra stepped forward, her hand resting on the hilt of her axe, her eyes narrowing. "Who are you?" she demanded, her tone like tempered steel. The figure tilted his head slightly, the faintest smile curving his lips beneath the hood. "Ah," he said softly. "The captain herself. Excellent. I was hoping to meet the one who commands the Sunborn's chosen." The knights shifted uneasily, their weapons half raised, the golden light of their armor flickering in the encroaching dark. Pyraxis let out a low growl that rolled like distant thunder, his eyes fixed on the stranger. The stranger stepped fully into the light, his form now clear to all who stood upon the battlefield. He was draped head to toe in a black cloak, its fabric shimmering faintly as though woven from shadow itself. Around his neck hung a shard of mirror, no larger than a man's palm, glinting with an unnatural brilliance of dark magic that caught the firelight and fractured it into cold, silvery beams. Beneath the hood, his face remained half hidden, pale, sharp, and unnervingly calm. He spread his arms slightly, as though addressing an audience. "You felt it too, didn't you?" he said, his voice carrying easily across the scorched valley. "That pull, that command, the same one that stirred me and drove your little goblin pets to their doom." His tone was almost playful, his smile faint but unmistakably mocking. "I didn't choose to attack your lands. I was commanded, just as you were commanded to defend them. I was sent to clear this land and find what gave off such a powerful, almost utterly divine representation." A ripple of confusion passed through the ranks of the Golden Conclave. Murmurs rose among the knights, uneasy, uncertain. Captain Lysandra's eyes narrowed, her hand tightening on her axe. Percival and Elric exchanged bewildered glances, their young faces pale in the firelight. From the center of the field, High Prince Alarion stepped forward. His voice rang clear and commanding. "You speak in riddles, stranger. Whatever force sent you here, it ends now. Surrender, and you will be shown mercy." The cloaked man tilted his head, the mirror shard at his neck catching the dying light. "Surrender?" he echoed, a soft laugh escaping him. "No, no, my shining prince. Mercy is not a language I speak." The air grew taut, the tension palpable. The knights instinctively drew back, forming a large, wide circle around the stranger. Prince Alarion's gaze hardened. "Then you leave me no choice." He raised his hand toward the ridge. "Pyraxis, burn him! Let the fire of the heavens cleanse this filth who would murder the innocent." The dragon's eyes flared as it met with action. With a thunderous roar that shook the mountains, Pyraxis launched from his perch, his wings unfurling in a storm of wind and ash. He drew in a breath that made the air itself tremble, then unleashed a torrent of flame so vast it turned the sky to fire. The ground split and glowed beneath the inferno's heat, molten rivers forming where the flames struck. The very air shimmered, and the valley blazed like a second sun. But just before the fire reached the cloaked man, it split apart, dividing cleanly down the center as though repelled by an unseen force. The flames roared past him harmlessly, scorching the earth on either side. When the blaze subsided, the man still stood untouched, the ground around him glowing red-hot, molten stone bubbling at his feet. He brushed a speck of ash from his cloak and smiled. "Nope," he said lightly. "Dragonfire can't hurt me, almost as if I am protected, one could say." A stunned silence fell. The knights stared in disbelief. Even Lysandra's composure faltered, her lips parting in shock. With a snarl of fury, Pyraxis dove from the ridge, his claws outstretched, his wings cutting through the smoke like blades. The ground quaked as he descended, his roar deafening. But as he struck, the cloaked man moved with impossible speed, his arm snapping up, his fist connecting squarely with the dragon's jaw. The impact was monstrous. The sound cracked like thunder. Pyraxis's massive body flipped backward through the air, his wings folding awkwardly as he crashed into the ground with earth-shaking force. The valley trembled, dust and flame erupting in all directions. The dragon lay momentarily stunned, his golden scales dimmed, his great head half buried in the scorched earth. Every knight stood frozen. Even the prince's breath caught in his throat. The impossible had just unfolded before their eyes. A being who had shrugged off dragonfire and felled one of the oldest living creatures in a single blow. The stranger stood unmoved amidst the ruin, the mirror at his throat gleaming coldly. His voice, calm and almost amused, drifted across the stunned silence. "Now," he said softly, "shall we talk about who's really giving the orders here?" To the prince's left, Captain Lysandra Stormheart roared, her twin axes spinning in a deadly rhythm as she charged. Beside her, Kael Ironward, Seren Vale, and Archmage Thalen Duray came together to attack as one. The stranger stood unmoving, his black cloak rippling in the heat, the mirror shard at his throat glinting coldly. As Lysandra's first strike came down, he sidestepped with effortless grace, her axes cutting through empty air. Kael's greatsword followed, a blow that could have split stone. But the man merely leaned aside, the blade missing by inches. Seren appeared behind him, daggers flashing toward his ribs, yet the stranger twisted, catching one blade between his fingers before shoving Seren back with a casual flick. "You're fast," he said, his tone mocking, but not fast enough. Lysandra snarled and came again, her axes crossing in a blur of silver and flame. The stranger ducked beneath them, pivoted, and drove his elbow into her chest plate, sending her staggering, her eyes large from the unmistakable power behind the impact, despite being just a simple elbow to the chest plate. Kyle's sword came down again, but the man caught it between his hands, stopping the massive blade mid-swing. "Impressive craftsmanship," he murmured, then shoved Kale backward with a wink of his eye as though the knight weighed nothing. Seren lunged once more, but the stranger vanished from his path, reappearing behind him in a shimmer of dark energy. "Keep up," he laughed. From behind, Thalen's voice rose in a chant, his staff blazing with runes. Golden fire erupted from the ground in a towering column, engulfing the stranger in light and fire. The knights shielded their eyes against the brilliance. When the flames died, the man still stood there, untouched and unfazed. "You'll have to do better than that, Archmage," he said lightly. Lysandra and Kale charged together, their weapons striking in perfect unison. The stranger met them both barehanded, deflecting axe and sword with movements too fast for mortal eyes. Sparks flew, the ground cracking beneath their feet. Serene darted in from the side, his daggers aimed for the man's throat. But the stranger caught his wrist mid-strike and flung him aside like a rag doll. "You fight well," he said, "but you're wasting your strength." Then High Prince Alarion stepped forward, his golden spear blazing with divine light. "Enough!" he commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. "You face the heir of Valoria, yield or be destroyed." The stranger turned, his smile unfazed. "Ah, the prince himself, the roaring dawn. I was wondering when you'd join the dance." Their clash was instant and thunderous. Alarion's spear struck with the fury of the sun, each thrust a blur of golden fire. The stranger met every blow with his hands, his movements fluid, his cloak swirling like living shadow. Sparks and embers filled the air as light and darkness collided. The knights watched in awe as their prince pressed forward, his strikes unrelenting, the ground glowing beneath his feet. Each attack from the prince left burns or glowing golden marks on the villain's hands, or where they met skin or clothing. For long moments, neither gained the upper hand. The prince's divine light seared the air, but the stranger's defenses were unbreakable. When Alarion feinted and drove his spear toward the man's heart, the stranger caught the shaft between two fingers, twisted, and forced the prince back several paces. Yet Prince Alarion did not falter. He lunged again, his spear blazing brighter, his voice a roar of defiance. He held up his spear, and a speck of stored sunlight shone off the golden spear blade, momentarily blinding the cloaked man. Prince Alarion sent the flat blade of his spear to the side of the man, impacting with his ribs and lifting him ever so slightly off the ground. The prince then quickly planted his spear into the burned soil for balance, and leg swept the stranger, sending him, cloak and all, tumbling to the ground. The man quickly stood up and let out a small, weak laugh. The two circled amid molten earth and drifting ash, their power shaking the battlefield. The stranger's laughter echoed between strikes, but there was a flicker of respect now in his eyes. The stranger straightened, brushing dirt now from his cloak. "Not bad, princeling. Not bad at all," he said softly. "Perhaps you are worth my time after all." Prince Alarion raised his spear again, his expression unyielding. "You'll find," he said, "that Valoria's light does not falter." The stranger's smile returned, faint and cold. "We'll see." And as the heat shimmered and the air trembled, the two forces, light and shadow, poised to clash once more, their duel blazing at the heart of a dying battlefield. An arrow whistled through the smoke and struck the cloaked man squarely in the right shoulder, the shaft burying itself deep where the arm met the joint. The impact spun him slightly, a spray of dark mist hissing from the wound. He looked down at the arrow jutting from his flesh, blinked once, and let out a dry, almost amused, "Ouch." For the first time, he seemed genuinely surprised. "That really hurts," he spat. "Play stupid games. Win stupid prizes," came a sharp voice from the ridge. Imperial Knight Craig Trilsh stepped forward, lowering his bow with a satisfied smirk. His armor gleamed with the gold of the Dawn Guard, the elite vanguard of the Empire. Behind him, two more figures descended the slope. His brothers, Sage and Bruce Trilsh, their weapons drawn and eyes locked on the enemy. With their arrival, the Dawn Guard stood at almost full strength. The air around them pulsed with divine energy, the heat of their combined power cutting through the haze of smoke and ash. The stranger's gaze flicked between them, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his hood. Sage, the youngest of the three, narrowed his eyes as recognition dawned. "I know that face," he said quietly, his voice edged with disbelief. "That's Mary Bright, the warrior mage from the old chronicles." His words hung in the air like a curse. Bruce frowned, his sword raised. "Impossible. He vanished many, many centuries ago." Sage didn't look away, his gaze fixed on the gleaming shard hanging from the man's neck. "Look at the totem," he said, his tone tightening. "That's the broken black shard, the relic from the tales, the one said to bind a soul to darkness itself." The twin blades in Sage's hands ignited, glowing with golden light that shimmered like liquid fire. He stepped forward, pointing one blade directly at the stranger's throat. "If the stories are true," he said coldly, "then you should have stayed buried in them." The cloaked man tilted his head, the faintest smile curving his lips despite the arrow still lodged in his shoulder. "So," he murmured, his voice low and mocking, "someone remembers my name." He reached up, grasped the arrow, and pulled it free with a wet snap. The wound sealed instantly, the flesh knitting together as if time itself obeyed his will. He dropped the bloodied arrow to the ground and met Sage's glare with eyes that gleamed like fractured glass. "Good," he said softly. "That means you'll understand exactly what's about to happen." Sage's blades still glowed with golden light as he stared at the dark figure before him. Sage's breath caught. A memory surfaced. An old song, one whispered by priests and sung to children when the shadows grew too long. His voice, low and steady, began to carry the words through the smoke. "When evil follows, the talisman rings. Clink, clank, goes the warning it brings. Clink, clink, the evil dread, the plague king wakes. The world turns red." The melody was ancient, haunting, and it seemed to make the air itself tremble. Even the flames nearby guttered lower, as though listening. Craig and Bruce exchanged uneasy glances, their weapons tightening in their grips. "The Dark Plague King's soul shards," Sage whispered when the last note faded. "That's what he wears. The totem isn't just a relic, it's one of them." Something suddenly changed on Mary's face, his expression of amusement now fully removed, as if scolded by an angry parent. Then Mary's smile returned, widened slow, deliberate, and cold. "You remember the song," he said softly. "It's nice to meet a fan, but I believe I've overstayed my welcome. I have enough to report back." He turned his gaze toward Prince Alarion, inclining his head in a gesture that was almost respectful. "I wish I could face you at your peak," he said, his tone calm and oddly sincere. "But if I continue, I see that I'll die the death of 1,000 cuts." And then he was gone. The air where he had stood shimmered once, and the shadow collapsed into nothing. For a long moment, no one moved. The battlefield was silent except for the crackle of dying flames and the faint hiss of cooling steel. The Dawn Guard stood motionless, their weapons still raised, as if waiting for the illusion to break. Prince Alarion exhaled slowly, lowering his spear. Mary Bright, the warrior mage, a legend from the chronicles, now standing before me. The thought echoed in his mind like a tolling bell. If the stories are true, and he truly served the Plague King, then something far darker has awakened beneath these lands. He looked around at his knights, their armor scorched, their faces streaked with ash and blood, and then at the village beyond. The weight of command settled heavily on his shoulders. Then he heard the distant sound of the golden conclave to carriages and caravans which contained the healers and mages off in the distance. "Good," he thought to himself. "We can finally offer help and healing to the injured or dying villagers." Then, with a deep breath, he raised his spear high. His voice rang out across the field, strong and clear. "Victory is ours! The Dawn Guard stands triumphant." A roar of cheers erupted from the ranks. The surviving soldiers lifted their weapons, their voices rising in unison, echoing across the valley. The sound was fierce and proud, the cry of men and women who had faced the impossible and endured. Prince Alarion allowed himself a brief smile before his expression hardened again. "See to the villagers," he commanded. "Give aid to the wounded, ours and theirs. Bury the dead with honor. Send word to the mages of resurrection. Tell them to come at once. If the gods will it, we may yet reclaim this village whole." The knights saluted and dispersed, their armor clinking softly as they moved among the ruins. He watched them go, his thoughts heavy. If Mary Bright truly walks again, then the shadows of the old wars are stirring. I must seek counsel from the reflections of Luminar, and learn from the hero Mercurius himself. Only then will I understand what power has awakened here. Nearby, the 7 Dawn Guards gathered, their armor dented but their spirits unbroken. They clanked their gauntlets together in salute, the metallic ring echoing like a promise. Craig grinned and said, "Well, my prince, that was no small skirmish." Prince Alarion gave a weary chuckle. "No," he replied, shaking his head. "This was not a fun-sized battle." The knights laughed, clapping him on the back before returning to their duties, while Imperial Knights Craig and his brothers looked puzzled at the laughter. Sage spoke up. "Must be a lame inside joke of sorts." The tension began to fade, replaced by the quiet rhythm of rebuilding, voices calling for aid, the sound of shovels in the earth, and the soft murmurs of healing spells. At the edge of the field, young Percival stood watching it all with Elric. His eyes were wide, reflecting the fading glow of the fires. He had seen knights clash with legends, had heard songs older than memory, and had watched his prince lead men through fire and death. The cheers of victory were still fading when a deep, guttural groan rolled across the battlefield. Heads turned toward the far end of the village, where a massive shape lay half buried beneath the shattered remains of tree and dirt. scales of crimson and gold glimmered faintly in the dying light. "By the light," Craig breathed. "Is that Pyraxis or a giant ostrich stuck headfirst in the ground?" Captain Lysandra said, "That villainous scoundrel in black sent our brave dragon to nap time with one punch." Before anyone could answer, Sage was already sprinting across the scorched ground, his armor clinking with every step. The Dawn Guard followed close behind, laughing and calling out as they approached the fallen dragon. "Pyraxis!" Sage shouted, skidding to a stop beside the enormous creature's head. "I missed the best part. I didn't get to see you knocked around like an angry chicken." For a moment, there was only silence. Then, a low rumble vibrated through the ground, followed by a puff of smoke and a slow blink of molten gold eyes. The dragon's voice emerged, deep and resonant, carrying both pride and humor. "How dare you compare me to birds that cannot even fly?" Pyraxis rumbled, his lips curling into what might have been a smirk. "No, my dear Sage. I prefer to think of it as falling with the grace of a swan." There was a heartbeat of stunned quiet, and then the entire company erupted into laughter. Even Prince Alarion, standing a few paces away, couldn't suppress a grin. Bruce doubled over, clutching his side. "A swan. By the gods, that's a new one." Sage chuckled, shaking his head. "If that's grace, I'll stick to dodging the evil villains when they throw a punch. Thank you very much." Pyraxis gave a deep, rumbling laugh that sent dust and ash scattering from his wings. "Mock all you like, little knights," he said, his tone playful. "Next time, you'll be the ones taking a nap while I finish the battle." The laughter spread through the ranks, light and unrestrained, echoing across the ruined fields. Prince Alarion looked at his imperial knights and felt a pure sense of pride as he turned to Captain Lysandra and dropped his fist onto her armored shoulder. The impact of flesh on armor produced a soft, comforting noise. "Thank you, my friends, for fighting for my people and for ourselves," he said as he looked upon each of the members of the Dawn Guard. His simile was infectious. "I only wish Almond was here instead of off negotiating our presence in these lands." Sage spoke next. "Haha, I can't wait until Almond comes and finds out the fight is over." They all let out a laugh, and Craig followed, saying, "5 coppers and a silver coin. He will plant his staff into the ground and say something like, 'This is outrageous!'" The group let out another laugh. As Pyraxis slowly lifted his head, shaking off the last of the rubble, the Dawn Guard stood around him, smiling through the soot and sweat. The dragon's eyes settled on the still laughing prince. "Seems," he said softly, "the age of heroes isn't done yet roaring dawn." The weight of that statement pressed heavy upon everyone. "Now let's set up camp. Get a roaring fire and drink to our success," finished the prince as he gave a comedic bow and walked to direct the building of camp. The group dispersed to complete their work. Percival whispered to himself, almost in awe, "I just witnessed the age of heroes." He truly believed it with all his heart, mind, and soul.